Chapter 1. The village of Dunhallow had 40 stone houses, a trading post, an inn with a sagging roof, and a mountain behind it that nobody climbed. Saren learned this within her first hour. She'd walked 3 days from the market town of Varanth, following a road that narrowed with every mile until it was barely wide enough for a goat. She came into the village on a Monday evening with mud on her boots and an ache in her shoulders, and the kind of hunger that made the smell of mutton stew from the inn's open door feel like a personal invitation. The inn was called the Saddleback. 5 tables, a fire in a stone hearth big enough to stand in, and an innkeeper named Doran who set a bowl of stew in front of her before she'd finished sitting down. Passing through, Doran asked. "Staying a night," Saren said. "I'm heading up the Ashen Maw in the morning." The room changed. Doran stopped wiping the bar. At the table nearest the fire, 3 old men looked up from their beers. "You're heading up," Doran said. "Cartographers Guild. I've got a contract to survey the upper region." "By yourself?" "That's how I work." The thinnest of the 3 old men set his glass down. He had hands like knotted rope and a face that had been worn down to the essentials. "The guilds sent people before," he said. "So I've heard," Saren said. 3 teams. The first lasted 2 weeks. The second lasted 4 days. The third went up for what they said was a long weekend. Their families were looking for them for 3 weeks before they came back down. Saren ate her stew. Equipment failures, according to the reports. The old man laughed. "Is that what they wrote?" "What would you write?" "That the mountain doesn't work the way mountains work," he said. "That time moves wrong up there. That compasses spin and maps don't match the terrain twice." He took a long drink of his beer. "That mountain doesn't want to be known." His name was Hagen. She'd learned this over the course of 3 more beers, along with a great deal else. He was 74 years old. He'd lived in Dunhallow his entire life. His grandmother had been the village's last real keeper of the old stories, and he'd inherited them the way other people inherited farmland. "The old songs," Saren said, "about the dragons." Hagen's eyes sharpened. "You know them?" "I collect them. 17 different versions from 17 different villages." He stared at her, then he smiled, and it changed his whole face. "Doran, get this woman another beer," he called. "I'm not paying for it," Saren said. "Put it on my tab," Hagen said. "You don't have a tab," Doran called back. "You have a debt." "Then add to it." Doran brought the beers. Hagen pushed his chair back and cleared his throat and sang. His voice was rough and old and cracked on the high notes, and it was the most beautiful version of the morning song Saren had ever heard. "They learned our words. They learned our songs. They mended what was broken. They stayed when it was wrong. And the one they called the sovereign, old as the stone, loved a woman of the valley and called this land his home." But the whispers came like winter, slow and then all at once. Too much power. Too much flame. Too much warmth for just one sun, and we built our pyres high on the hills where they had slept, and we burned away the only ones who'd ever truly wept. For us. They asked for nothing but to stay. We could not let them. The fire crackled. Nobody spoke. Saren realized her hands were tight around her glass. "The verse about the sovereign," she said, "that's new to me." "Most versions leave him out," Hagen said. "My grandmother kept him in." He stared into the fire. "He was the oldest, the most powerful. The song says he loved a woman of the valley, but my grandmother said that part hadn't happened yet when the song was written. She said it was a prophecy. That one day a woman would come to the mountain and the sovereign would love her, and she would love him back." "A prophecy," Saren said. "That's what she said. The verse was about something that was still coming." Hagen took a drink. "The rest of the story, when the killing started, he was alone. No partner, no family. He'd kept himself apart. And when it was over and the others were dead, he burned the valley where they'd lived, 3 days of fire. Then he disappeared." He paused. My grandmother said he didn't leave, though. She said he's still up there. On the mountain, Saren said. On the mountain? People in the village talk about it going back generations. A man in the high territory, always the same man, never ages, never comes down. And people here believe that. People here believe it. People in Varanth think we're mad. Hagen finished his beer. You can think whatever you want, but I'll tell you this, the guild teams didn't leave because of equipment failures. They left because the mountain scared them. I've summited peaks higher than the Ashenmaw, Saren said. I've surveyed the Corthine Range, 8,000 feet of vertical in active weather. I've mapped glaciers. Alone. The Corthine Range doesn't change shape when you look away from it, Hagen said. Mountains don't change shape. This one does. They looked at each other. The fire burned between them. Get some sleep, Hagen said. You've got a long climb. She pushed back her chair and pulled on her coat. Hagen watched her, his old eyes steady over his glass. The man on the mountain, Saren said. Has anyone from the village actually seen him? In person? My grandmother did, Hagen said. She was young, picking berries at the edge of the high forest. She looked up and he was standing on the ridge above her, watching. She said he looked like he'd been standing there forever, that his eyes were the saddest thing she'd ever seen. He set down his glass. She left her basket where it sat and walked home, never went back up. Saren turned that over for a moment. Outside, the wind moved against the inn's shutters. She wasn't afraid of much, my grandmother, Hagen said. That's the part that always stayed with me. Good night, Hagen, Saren said. Be careful up there, he paused. You're always alone, that's the opposite of careful. She thought about saying something to that. She didn't. She left at first light. Marin, Doran's wife, caught her at the trading post and pressed a bundle of honey cake into her hands. Hagen was leaning against the wall outside, and he gave her a small carved stone with a symbol on it. Dragon territory marker, he said. My grandmother's. She said if you carry one, the mountain knows you mean no harm. Saren turned it in her fingers. It was warm, warmer than it should have been on a cold October morning. Humor an old man, Hagen said. She put it in her pocket. She shouldered her pack. She walked out of the village and up into the trees. The last thing she heard, faint behind her, was Hagen humming the morning song. Chapter 2. The first 4 hours were ordinary. Cold trail, hard frost, old pines. The kind of mountain hiking she'd done 1,000 times. She let her body take over, settling into the rhythm, and her mind went quiet the way it always did on the trail. This was why she did the work, this simplicity. One foot, then the other. She'd been walking most of her life. She'd grown up in a town called Resic in the lowlands. Her mother died when she was 6, pneumonia, in the wet spring, in a house with a leaking roof her father couldn't afford to fix. After that, it was just the two of them. Her father was a carpenter. A decent, quiet man who came home each evening smelling of sawdust and sat at the kitchen table and ate his dinner and looked at his daughter and didn't know what to say to her. She loved him. She knew he loved her. But there was a gap between them that neither of them could close. She'd come home from school with her knees scraped and a bird's nest in her pocket, and he'd look at her like she was a person he hadn't expected and couldn't quite place. She climbed everything. She read everything. She asked questions that made her teachers uncomfortable and spent whole days in the hills above the town, mapping them with sticks and stones, filling notebooks with charts of streams and ridgelines she kept hidden under her mattress. She had one friend growing up, a girl named Tessa who lived 2 streets over and who liked to read and didn't mind that Saren was odd. They were close for years, close enough that Saren thought it meant something permanent. Then Saren's father got sick when she was 15 and she asked Tessa for help, just company, just someone to sit with her in the evenings when the house was too quiet, and Tessa stopped coming around. Didn't explain, didn't argue, just gone. Saren saw her in the market a month later, and Tessa looked straight through her. She left Resic at 17. Her father stood in the kitchen doorway while she packed. "You'll write," he said. "I'll write," she said. She did for a while. Then the letters got further apart and then they stopped, and by the time she thought about starting again, too much time had passed and she didn't know what to say. He died when she was 23. She got word from a neighbor. She didn't go back for the funeral. She told herself it was because the distance was too far. It wasn't the distance. 11 years of moving since then. The guild paid her well. She was good at the work. She'd built a life out of difficult terrain and solitude, and it was a fine life. At night, though, at the end of the day, when the work was done and the fire was burning and there was nothing left between her and the silence, at night, the life felt thin. The temperature changed around mid-morning. She noticed it the way you notice a sound stopping. The cold was just gone. At 6,000 feet in late October, the air turned mild and soft. The frost vanished. The trees changed. Pines gave way to broad-leafed giants she couldn't identify, with pale bark and glossy green leaves. Wildflowers grew along the trail in summer colors. A stream crossed the path, and when she touched the water, it was warm. She stood up and looked around. Below her, visible through gaps in the canopy, the world was brown and gray. Up here it was spring. The boundary between the two was sharp, almost a line drawn across the mountainside. She took readings: temperature, humidity, compass bearing. The compass needle drifted and settled, like it couldn't make up its mind. She checked her watch. It read noon. The sun was already low in the west, angled the way it angled at 4 or 5 in the afternoon. She tapped the watch. It was ticking normally. The sun was wrong, or the watch was wrong, and she couldn't figure out which. She wrote everything down. Her handwriting was steady. Her mind was steady. She kept climbing. The trail got stranger. She'd mark a waypoint, walk for 20 minutes, and when she checked her position, the waypoint had shifted. The terrain rearranged itself in small ways, always just at the edge of what she could be sure of. A boulder she'd passed 10 minutes ago appeared ahead of her. A fork in the trail that she was certain had gone left now went right. She marked a tree with her knife, walked for 30 minutes, came back to the same tree and found the mark on the opposite side of the trunk. She stood there and looked at the knife mark and breathed. "All right," she said out loud, to the mountain, to the air, "all right." She made camp on the upper ridge as the light failed. The view stopped her. A valley opened below, stretching between the peaks, green and enormous, with a river cutting through its center, bright in the last light. The air smelled of grass and warm stone and something electric, like the air before lightning. She set up her tent, built a fire, cooked her dinner. Ate it sitting on the edge of the ridge, watching the colors change. Gold to copper to deep violet. The stars came out thicker and brighter than she'd ever seen them, so close she felt she could reach up and touch them. The silence was immense. She sat in it and felt the loneliness settle over her the way it did every evening. She knew its weight by now. She slept, she dreamed of fire. The fall happened on the 3rd day. She was traversing a narrow section of the ridge where the rock was loose, and the north side dropped 500 feet to a boulder field. She was roped in, careful, testing each foothold. A slab shifted under her boot, and she went sideways. The rope caught. She slammed against the rock face, and her right wrist folded under her, and something in it ground, and the pain was immediate and total. She hung in the harness, gasping. Her shoulder had wrenched in the fall, and she could feel it sitting wrong in the socket. She looked up 10 feet to the ridge. She could climb 10 feet. She got 5 feet up, and her good hand slipped on wet rock, and she fell again, and the rope caught, and her shoulder screamed, and she hung there, spinning slowly, 500 feet of nothing below her. She was alone on a mountain nobody visited, on a contract nobody would check for 2 weeks. Her right wrist was useless. Her left shoulder was dislocated. The rope held her, but she couldn't climb it. She hung there and thought about this very clearly and very calmly, and understood that she was in real trouble. Then the rope moved. She was rising. Someone above her was pulling the rope, smooth and steady, and she came up over the edge and onto solid rock and lay there on her back, breathing, the sky enormous above her. A face appeared, a man crouching beside her. She registered him in pieces. Black hair, thick and dark, pushed back from his face in a way that said he hadn't thought about it. Broad shoulders, a jaw that was all hard angles. And then he looked directly at her and she felt the breath go out of her, because his eyes were extraordinary, blue, shot through with green, pale and vivid, and unlike anything she'd seen before. He was beautiful in a way that was slightly alarming, and she had the sudden, inconvenient awareness of exactly how she herself looked after 3 days on a ridge. She pushed the thought away. Her shoulder was dislocated. "Your wrist," he said. "Let me see." His voice was low and had an odd precision to it, each word chosen carefully. He took her hand and his fingers were warm, much warmer than they should have been, and the warmth went into her wrist and the pain eased. She focused on that instead of his face. "Sprained," he said. "Not broken, your shoulder is out." "I know," she said. "I can reset it." "Who are you?" "I can tell you my name, or I can fix your shoulder. You look like you'd prefer the shoulder." She almost laughed. The pain was enormous, but the absurdity of it, a stranger on a deserted mountain making dry jokes while she hung half off a cliff, cut through it cleanly. "Shoulder," she said, "then name." He braced her, the joint shifted. White pain, a pop, and then relief so complete she gasped. "Kale," he said. "My name is Kale." "Saren," she said. "I know." "How?" "Sound carries on this mountain. You gave your name in the village." "That's 3 hours' walk from here," she said. He didn't answer that. He was wrapping her wrist with a strip of cloth, his movements quick and practiced. She watched his hands, large, scarred across the knuckles, very certain in what they were doing. When he finished, he helped her sit up and handed her a cup of something warm and dark that he'd made over a small fire she didn't remember him building. "Drink," he said. She drank, the pain faded to something distant. "What is this?" she asked. "Tea from plants in the valley. It'll help." She looked at him over the rim of the cup. He was crouching across from her, still, firelight catching the line of his jaw and those blue-green eyes. He looked like a man in his 30s. He also looked older than that, not in his face, but in the way he held himself, that settled weight of someone who had been exactly where they were for a very long time. "You're the one they talk about," she said. "In the village, the man on the mountain." He said nothing. "Hagen says you've been up here for generations. His grandmother saw you when she was young." "Hagen talks too much," Kale said. "He's a good singer." Something shifted in his face, a softening she almost missed. "His grandmother was better," he said. The valley spread below them, dark now, the river a thread of silver in the moonlight. "Rest," he said. "I'll keep the fire." "I don't sleep around strangers," she said. "That's wise, but you have a sprained wrist and a shoulder that's just been reset, and you've been hanging from a rope for 40 minutes. You need rest." She wanted to argue. The tea was pulling her down, the rock beneath her was warm, and something about his presence, the way he sat there, solid and watchful, made the part of her brain that kept guard ease its grip. She slept. When she woke, he was gone. The fire was still burning. Her pack was beside her, which she'd left at camp 2 hours away. Her wrist was freshly wrapped. A leather pouch of dried herbs sat on the rock beside her. She sat up in the gray dawn light and looked at the empty space where he'd been and held the leather pouch and tried to decide if any of it had been real. Chapter 3. She spent the next week trying to convince herself it hadn't been. She worked. She took readings. She documented anomalies. The time drift was consistent. Her watch lost roughly 3 hours for every day she spent above 6,000 feet. The compass remained unreliable. The terrain continued its subtle rearrangements. And she kept seeing him. A figure on a distant ridge. A shape among the trees that might have been a man or might have been shadow. Once, looking up from her work, someone standing on the cliff above her, tall and still and watching. By the time she reached the spot, there was nothing but warm rock and the faint smell of wood smoke. She wrote it all down. Day 5, figure on northern ridge. Day 7, movement in tree line. Day 9, figure on cliff above survey point 14. Gone on approach. She was a surveyor. She documented what she observed. At night, sitting by her fire, she'd take out the leather pouch and smell the herbs, and the memory of him would come back, the warmth of his hands, those eyes catching the firelight, the way he'd said "I know" when she told him her name. She told herself she was thinking about the impossibility of him. That was all she was thinking about. She also kept noticing things at her campsite she couldn't explain. A bundle of dry firewood neatly stacked. Berries she didn't recognize, left on the flat rock she used as a table, covered with a strip of bark to keep off the dew. She ate the berries. They were sweet and sharp and tasted like nothing she'd had before. On the 10th night, sitting by her fire going over her notes, she started singing. She did this sometimes when the silence got too big, the old songs from her journal. She worked through 3 of them, then moved to Hagen's version, and when she reached the verse about the sovereign, she sang it quietly, looking at the fire, and her voice cracked on the last line, and she kept going anyway. They asked for nothing but to stay. We could not let them. She stopped. He was standing at the edge of the firelight. Her heart lurched. She didn't move. He was maybe 20 feet away, half in shadow, firelight catching the hard planes of his face and the black of his hair. He was real. He was there. Standing upright in the open, he was taller than she'd registered on the ground, broad through the shoulder, and she felt the awareness move through her before she'd finished the thought. She made herself breathe. "I didn't hear you," she said. "You were singing," he said. His voice was the same as she remembered. Low, each word placed. "How long have you been there?" "A while." "You've been leaving things at my camp," she said. "You need to eat better. Trail rations aren't enough at this altitude." "So you're real?" "Yes." "I've spent a week telling myself you weren't." "I know," Cale said. "I've been watching." She looked at him across the fire. He stood the way he'd crouched on the ridge, weight evenly placed, completely still. "Sit down," she said, "please." He hesitated. She could see it in his body, a brief tightening, as if the act of sitting at someone's fire was something he'd forgotten how to do. Then he came forward and sat on the rock across from her, and the firelight caught his face fully. The jaw, the black hair, and when he looked at her, those eyes, blue-green, pale and vivid, reflecting the fire between them. She looked at her notes. He looked tired, the deep kind, the kind that had nothing to do with sleep. They sat in silence. The fire crackled, an owl called from the valley below, the stars moved overhead. "The song you were singing," he said, "where did you learn that version?" "Hagen, in the village," she said, "the verse about the sovereign." "Yes." He was looking at the fire. His hands hung between his knees. She could see the scars on his knuckles again, faded and old, and she made herself look at her journal instead. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask." "How long have you been up here?" The owl called again. She waited. "A very long time," he said. "The villagers say generations." "The villagers are right." She let that sit. The fire burned. She wasn't sure what she believed, but the man in front of her was real, and the mountain was real, and the things she'd observed over the last 10 days defied every explanation she had. "Cale," she said, "the symbols on the marker stones. I found 14 of them along the ridge. They match the descriptions in the oldest dragon songs, territory markers." He looked at her. The fire moved between them. "You've been surveying me," he said. the same way you survey the terrain. I observe things, it's what I do. You're good at it. I know, she paused. I've been collecting those songs for 7 years. I've walked hundreds of miles to find them. 17 versions. And sitting here, looking at you, listening to the mountain do whatever the mountain does, I'm starting to think they might be more than songs. He was quiet for a long time. She could hear the river in the valley far below, a faint, constant sound. They're true, he said, most of them. The details change in the telling, but the heart of them is true. The dragons, she said. The dragons. The massacre. The massacre. And the sovereign. He looked at her, the fire reflected in his eyes, and for just a moment the reflection looked wrong. Too bright, too deep, as if the light in them wasn't a reflection at all. You should get some rest, he said and stood up. Kale. Get some rest, Saren. He walked into the dark. She listened until she couldn't hear his footsteps anymore, and then she sat by the fire for another hour, holding Hagen's carved stone in her pocket, feeling it warm against her palm. She didn't sleep for a long time that night. Chapter 4. After that, he came to the fire. He didn't come every night. Every second or third evening, she'd look up from her work and he'd be there, at the edge of the light, waiting for her to notice him. She learned to feel his presence before she saw it, a shift in the air, a particular quality of warmth that had direction to it. He never sat close. He kept the fire between them always. He spoke carefully, each sentence considered, and she began to understand that this was a man who had spent so long alone that conversation was something he was relearning. He'd pause mid-sentence sometimes, searching for a word, and she'd wait, and the word would come, and it would be the right one. How long since you talked to someone? She asked one evening, her second week on the mountain. Talked or spoke, he said. Is there a difference? Speaking is forming words, talking is wanting someone to hear them. He looked at the fire. A long time. The language has changed since then, she said. You speak well, but you choose your words like someone who learned by listening. You notice everything, he said. Occupational habit. It's more than that. She poked the fire and sent a shower of sparks into the dark. The villagers, she said, you've been listening to them from up here, learning how the language shifted. The mountain carries sound, Kale said. Voices, music. On still nights I can hear Hagen singing in the inn. That's miles away. I have good hearing. That's not good hearing, that's impossible hearing. He almost smiled. She was learning to watch for it, the slight movement at the corner of his mouth, quickly contained. It changed his face entirely when it happened. She was aware of that more than she wanted to be. There are a lot of impossible things on this mountain, he said. She let that go. She was learning to let things go with him, to not push at the doors he wasn't ready to open. He rewarded patience. Every evening he said a little more, let her a little closer. She told him about the surveys, the guild's frustration with the Ashenmaw, the teams that came back with unusable data and stories they were embarrassed to put in writing. The second team, she said, they went up for 4 days and came back 3 weeks later. They couldn't account for the missing time. Their beards hadn't grown. Their food supplies were still full. Time is different here, Kale said. I've noticed, my watch loses 3 hours a day. Higher up, it's worse. Near the peak, a day can pass while a week goes by below. How is that possible? The mountain is old, Saren, older than the villages, older than the language they speak in them. There is a kind of power that seeps into the land when something ancient lives in it long enough, and that power bends things. Time, temperature, the behavior of living things. Something ancient, she said, you. He looked at her, the fire burned. Ask the question you want to ask, he said. Are you what the songs say you are? The wind moved through the valley below. The fire shifted, and the shadows on his face rearranged. "Yes," he said. She nodded, slowly. She'd known it since the first night, since his hands on her wrist and the heat that came off him and the way his eyes caught the light. She'd known it, and she'd spent 2 weeks pushing the thought away, and now it came back and stayed. "Say it," he said. "I need to hear you say it." "You're the sovereign," she said, "the dragon from the song." "Yes." They looked at each other across the fire. The stars turned. The mountain hummed its deep, low hum. "I should be afraid," she said. "Are you?" She thought about it honestly. Her heart was going fast. Her hands were steady. "No," she said, "I'm not." Something moved in his face. It was there and then gone, his expression settling back into that careful stillness. But for just a moment, she'd seen beneath it, and what was underneath looked like someone surfacing after a very long time underwater. "I should go," he said. He stood up. "You always leave," she said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because staying is harder." He walked into the dark. She sat by the dying fire and felt the mountain humming beneath her and understood that her life had just divided into before and after. Chapter 5. The weeks passed. She lost track of how many. Her watch had become meaningless. She'd stopped checking it after it started running backward. She counted days by sunrises instead, and even those felt uncertain. She ate when she was hungry. She slept when she was tired. She worked when the light was good. What was happening was this. She was falling in love with a man she barely knew, on a mountain that bent time, and the man was 700 years old and could turn into a dragon. She didn't examine it. She let it be a fact. The way the compass spinning was a fact, and the terrain shifting was a fact, and she kept moving. He came to the fire more often now. Every other night, then every night, appearing at the edge of the light with that hesitant stillness that did something to her chest every time. He'd sit. They'd talk. He'd leave before dawn. Each night he sat a little closer. The problem, and she was clear-eyed enough to call it that, was purely physical. When he moved into the firelight and settled onto the rock across from her, she was aware of him in a way that had nothing to do with what he was saying. The way the light caught his jaw, the black of his hair against his neck, those eyes, blue-green and strange, catching the fire. She'd be in the middle of a perfectly reasonable conversation, and her body would register something, the shift of his weight, his hands moving, and she'd lose the thread of what she'd been saying and have to find it again. She handled it by keeping her eyes on her notes when he sat down and her hands busy when they weren't. He didn't appear to notice. She was fairly certain he didn't notice. She was fairly certain she was wrong about that. She learned about his world in fragments. He didn't tell stories the way Hagen told stories, in a rush, eager to share. He gave her pieces one at a time, making sure each one landed before adding the next. He told her about Ashkari, a dragon who'd been a healer. She'd spent decades studying human medicine, compiling her knowledge into a book so other dragons could help the villages they lived near. She could cure almost anything, Kale said. People traveled hundreds of miles to see her. She had a clinic in a village called Terath, and every morning there'd be a line at her door. What happened to her? Saren asked. When the killing started, she refused to leave. She said her patients needed her. His voice was steady. They burned the clinic with her inside. He told her about Salhrin, who could make it snow in summer. He'd do it for the children in the mountain villages. They'd run out into the streets, shrieking and laughing, catching snowflakes in July. He told her about Castle, who fell in love with a human poet and learned to write verse that could make grown men weep. All gone, all dead in the massacre. How many survived? She asked. 7 out of hundreds. I was one of 7. Where are the others? Scattered, we don't see each other. Why? He picked up a stick and pushed at the fire. sparks rose into the dark. "When I see them, I see everyone who's missing," he said. "It's easier to be alone." "Easier," she said. "I didn't say better." She was quiet for a moment. "Kale," she said, "the song talks about a woman, the sovereign's woman." His hand on the stick went still. "Hagen says his grandmother thought it was a prophecy, that it hadn't happened yet." He was quiet for a long time. "My people loved your people," he said. "Many of them took human partners, built lives together, families." He paused. "I never did. I was always at the edges, close to humans but never fully among them. I told myself it was caution, that the distance kept everyone safer." "And then the massacre happened," she said. "And everyone who had let themselves love, who had built something real with a human partner, they couldn't leave. They stayed because they loved too much to run, and they died for it." He put the stick down. "And I survived, because I'd never loved anyone enough to stay." She reached across the fire and took his hand. She didn't think about it, she just did it. His hand was warm, too warm, and she felt the tremor in it, the deep shaking of someone who had held themselves completely still for a very long time and was remembering, just now, how to feel. He looked at her hand on his. He didn't pull away. 300 years, he said. "And the thing I've thought about every single day is whether the ones who stayed and died were braver than me, whether loving that deeply and paying for it was better than surviving with nothing." They sat like that. The fire burned down, the stars moved. "I should go," he said eventually. "You could stay," she said. "Saren." "Just by the fire. I'm not asking for anything. I'm saying you don't have to walk back up the mountain in the dark. You could stay by the fire and I'll be in my tent and it'll be fine." He looked at her. She could see him fighting it. "Okay," he said, so quietly she almost didn't hear. "Okay. Okay, I'll stay." She went into her tent. She lay in her bedroll, and through the thin canvas she could see the glow of the fire and the shape of him beside it, and she lay there and felt something she hadn't felt in 11 years of wandering. Safe. She slept better than she had in months. In the morning he was still there, sitting by the ashes of the fire, watching the sunrise. When she came out of the tent with her hair tangled and her face creased from sleep, he looked at her and said, "Good morning." 2 words. He said them like they cost him something. Like the act of greeting another person at the start of a day was a skill he'd lost and was just now remembering. "Good morning," she said. "I made tea." "With the herbs from the valley?" "Yes." She sat beside him, not across, beside. He didn't move away. They drank tea and watched the sunrise, and said nothing, and the silence between them was easy. Chapter 6. He showed her the cabin a week later, or maybe 2 weeks. Time had stopped meaning anything. It was built into the slope above the valley, stone walls, heavy wooden door, a chimney that leaked thin smoke. From outside it looked small. Inside it was something else. One large room, a fire burning in a stone hearth. Shelves lining every wall, floor to ceiling, packed with centuries of collected things. Books in bindings she'd never seen. Stacks of letters tied with cord. Carved figures, each one small enough to hold in her palm, so detailed she could see individual feathers on a hawk. Pressed flowers behind glass. Folded cloth. The room itself was warm in a way that had nothing to do with the fire. "This is your world," she said. "This is what's left of it," he said. She walked along the shelves. She didn't touch anything. The books were in languages she couldn't read. The letters were in hands that ranged from elegant to barely legible. The carved figures showed scenes she recognized from the songs. Dragons curled around villages, humans and dragons sitting together at fires, a dragon in flight with its wings spread against a carved sky. She stopped in front of a particular carving. A group of figures around a fire, leaning toward each other, their faces detailed enough to show expression. Joy, companionship. And at the edge of the group, slightly apart, a single figure. Watching, alone. "That's you," she said. He was standing by the hearth, watching her move through his world. "Yes," he said. "You're always a little separate." "I was the oldest, the most powerful. People respected me, they listened to me, but I never quite," he stopped. "I never let myself all the way in." "Why?" "I was afraid that if I loved something completely, I would lose it, so I kept my distance. And when the massacre came, that distance saved me." His voice was quiet. "And damned me." Saren looked at the carved figure at the edge of the group. She knew that feeling. She'd lived it her whole life. "These letters," she said, "they're from the dragons who died." "From everyone I knew," Kale said. "Every letter anyone ever wrote me, every drawing, every note, I saved them all." 300 years of letters. 300 years of trying to hold on to people who are gone. She looked at him. He was standing by the hearth, firelight on his face. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour, the kind of tired that had been building for centuries. She could see it clearly now. "Thank you for showing me," she said. "Are you hungry?" he said. "Always." He cooked. She sat by the fire. He moved around the small kitchen with a quiet efficiency that came from centuries of living alone, working with spices she didn't know and vegetables from a garden that grew year-round. "This is good," she said when they ate. "You say that every time," he said. "It's true every time." "You set a low bar." "I've been eating trail rations for weeks. Everything tastes good." "You've been here longer than 3 weeks," he said. She looked at him. "What?" "Your watch stopped working. You've been counting sunrises. But the days up here are longer than the days below. You've been on the mountain for almost 2 months." 2 months, her contract was for 3 weeks. "The guild will think I'm dead," she said. "I sent word," Kale said. "You what?" "I left a note at the trailhead. Your handwriting, your words. I said the terrain was more complex than expected. I asked for an extension." "You forged a letter from me." "I forged a letter as you." "How do you know my handwriting?" "I've watched you write in your journal. I have a good memory." She stared at him. "That's incredibly presumptuous." "Yes," he said. "And strange." "Also yes." "And kind," she said. He looked at her. "I didn't want you to have to leave." The words sat in the air between them. She felt them in her chest, in her throat. "Kale." "You don't have to say anything," he said. "I know I don't, I'm choosing to." She put her bowl down. "I didn't want to leave either." That night they sat by the fire in his cabin, and he told her about the dragon world. "We lived in a place between," he said. "You'd call it another realm, but it wasn't separate from yours. It was layered over it. The same mountains, the same rivers, but seen through different eyes. In our world, the mountains were alive. They breathed. They remembered. A mountain could hold the memory of every creature that had ever walked on it, and if you knew how to listen, you could hear them." "And you came down to the human world?" she asked. "We moved between the two. We'd spend time in the high places, where the air was fire and the sky was different colors and the rivers ran with light. And then we'd come down and walk among your people and help where we could." "What did it look like, your world?" He was quiet for a moment. His eyes went distant. "The sky was the color of molten copper at dawn," he said. "The mountains glowed. There were forests where the trees were made of crystal, and the leaves rang like bells when the wind moved through them. Rivers of liquid gold that were warm to swim in. Caves deep in the mountains where the walls pulsed with light, and you could lie down and feel the heartbeat of the earth itself." "It sounds like a dream," she said. It was real. It's still there. I could go back. I could take my other shape and fly to the high peaks and slip between the worlds and be there in an hour. Why don't you? Because it's empty, he said. We lived there together, hundreds of us. We raised our young in those crystal forests. We swam in those gold rivers. We sang in those caves. He paused. An empty paradise is just a beautiful room with no one in it. She reached over and took his hand. He closed his fingers around hers. Show me, she said, someday when you're ready. He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, very gently. The warmth of his mouth went through her skin. Someday, he said. Chapter 7. It happened on a morning when the mist was thick in the valley, and the air smelled of rain. She'd been sleeping in the cabin for weeks now. It had started the night after their first kiss, when they'd come down from the ridge and he'd stood in the doorway of the cabin, and she'd stood on the path below, and neither of them had moved. Stay, he'd said. In the cabin, she'd asked. With me. She'd walked up the path and into the cabin and into his arms, and they hadn't spent a night apart since. She slept in the bed by the hearth. He lay beside her. He didn't need sleep the way she did. Dragons could go months without it, but he stayed. He stayed because she'd fall asleep to the slow drum of his heartbeat, and every night she slept deeper and more peacefully than she had in her entire life. She woke and he was gone. The bed was still warm where he'd been. She pulled on her boots and went outside. Mist everywhere, thick and white, the world reduced to a few feet of visibility. The air was soft and had that electric quality she'd come to associate with him, a charge in the atmosphere, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. She followed the warmth, through the trees up the slope to the high ridge where the rock was bare. He was standing at the edge, his back to her, his shape blurred in the mist. The air tore open. There was no other way to describe it. The space around him rippled and split, and he was gone, and something enormous filled the ridge. Heat rolled off it in a wave that pushed the mist back like a curtain. The dragon. He was vast. He filled the ridge the way a storm fills a valley. His scales were charcoal black, shifting to deep ember at the edges, and they moved as he breathed thousands of them, each one the size of her spread hand. His wings, half-furled, stretched wider than the trees were tall, and the membrane between the bones was thin enough that she could see the dawn light through it, blood-red and glowing. His head was the size of a cart, angular, heavy, with a jaw that could have closed around her whole body. His claws gripped the stone, and the stone cracked under them, hairline fractures spreading outward. The rock beneath his feet steamed. The mist evaporated in a circle around him from the heat rolling off his body in waves she could feel on her face from 20 feet away. His eyes were molten copper, huge and bright, with vertical pupils that contracted when he turned his head and saw her. She sat down, her legs gave out, and she sat on the cold, wet rock and looked up at him. Her heart was going so hard she could feel it in her throat. She was looking at the thing the songs described, the thing she'd spent 7 years collecting stories about, and the songs had not come close. He turned his head and saw her. His whole body went rigid. Those enormous copper eyes fixed on her, and in them she could see recognition and fear. His fear, that she would run. Hi, she said, her voice cracked. Hi. She sat there, she breathed. She looked at him. The mist curled around his body and burned off where it touched his scales. He was impossible, and she could see, in the copper of his eyes, the same person who made her tea and held her hand by the fire. You're still you, she said. A sound came from deep in his chest. Low, deep, vibrating through the rock and up through the soles of her feet. Come back, she said. Please come back. The air shimmered. The vast shape contracted, folded, compressed. And he was standing there, human-shaped, breathing hard, his face raw and open and terrified. She got up, she went to him. She put her arms around him, and he was shaking, all of him, and she held him. I see you, she said. I see all of you. He broke. His arms came around her so tight she could barely breathe, and his face was in her hair and he was shaking, and she held him and the sun came through the mist, and the valley turned gold below them. 300 years, he said, his voice was ragged. 300 years I've hidden, 300 years. I know, she said. You didn't run. I'm not going to run. He pulled back, his eyes were wet. She reached up and wiped his cheek with her thumb, and he caught her hand and held it against his face and closed his eyes. I'm terrified, he said. Me too, she said. You're a human woman on a mountain. What have you got to be terrified about? You, absolutely you. He laughed. It was broken and raw, half laugh and half sob, and his face when he made it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. She kissed him. She put her hands on his face and pulled him down and kissed him, and his mouth was warm, so warm, and for a second he went completely still, as if the sensation had short-circuited something in him. Then his hands found her waist and pulled her in, and he kissed her back, and the world tilted. She had kissed people before. This was different. His mouth moved against hers with a hunger that shook through his whole body, centuries of restraint cracking apart in real time. She ran her fingers up the back of his neck into his hair, thick and dark, the same as she'd been trying not to think about for weeks, and he made a sound against her mouth, low and ragged, and she felt it all the way down. He pulled back. His breathing was unsteady. His eyes were dark and wide, and she could see, behind the surface of them, the faintest flicker of copper. I need to be careful with you, he said. His voice was rough. No, you don't, she said. Sarin, the heat, when I feel things this strongly, the fire. I know what you are. I'm not fragile. She kissed him again. She grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled him against her, and his arms came around her, and she felt the full force of him, enormous, ancient, choosing to hold her gently, and the gentleness undid her more than anything else could have. His mouth traced down her jaw, her neck, the hollow of her throat. She felt his breath on her skin, hot, and everywhere his lips touched her she felt the heat bloom through her. She tipped her head back and his arm tightened around her waist, and the morning sun poured down, and the mist burned off around them, and the valley opened below. They stood on the ridge for a long time, holding each other, and neither of them moved to leave. Chapter 8. The days that followed were the happiest of her life. She would think about this later. She would hold the memory of those days carefully, turning them over and over. They lived in the cabin. She cooked. He cooked. They argued about whose food was better. She continued the survey because she needed something to do with her hands and because she couldn't quite let go, even now, even surrounded by impossible things. He came with her sometimes, walking beside her through the valley. The marker stones, she said one afternoon. They were walking along the river, the sun on their faces. Territory markers. Boundary stones, Cale said. They mark the edge of my domain. Everything inside them is mine. And the symbols. My name, in the old script, the language we spoke before we learned yours. You have your name carved on 14 rocks, she said. I had a lot of free time. She laughed. He looked at her when she laughed. He always did. His face would change, something in it opening, and he'd watch her with an expression so unguarded she had to look away sometimes. Don't look away, he said once. I've waited a long time to look at someone like this. It's a lot, she said. I know, I'm sorry. I didn't say stop. He showed her things. The garden behind the cabin where impossible things grew. A cave in the mountainside where the walls pulsed with soft light, veins of something luminous running through the rock, the air humming at a frequency she felt in her teeth. This is a dragon place, he said, a crossing point. If I took my other shape here, I could step between the worlds. Into the place with the crystal forests and the gold rivers, she said. Yes. Have you been back since the massacre? Once, Cale said, about 100 years after, I flew to the high peaks and crossed over and walked through the forests. He was quiet. The crystal trees were still ringing. The wind hadn't stopped. It sounded like music. Was it beautiful? She asked. It was the loneliest thing I've ever experienced. She took his hand. He laced his fingers through hers. One afternoon, she found him on the ridge in his other form. He was lying on the warm rock with his wings spread, his eyes half closed, his massive body rising and falling with each breath. She walked up and sat against his side and leaned her back against his scales, warm, like leaning against a wall the sun had been hitting all day, and felt the vibration of his heartbeat through the stone. She sang the morning song, the old version, Hagen's version. She sang it sitting against the side of a dragon, her voice small in the open air, and when she reached the verse about the sovereign, she felt his breathing change. She stopped singing. She put her hand flat against his scales. "I'm here," she said. A sound from his chest, that deep, vibrating rumble. She felt it move through her body. He shifted back. He was beside her, and he pulled her against him and held her. "I love you," he said. He said it like he was breaking a law. 700 years of life, and he had never said those words to a living soul, and he said them to her on a warm rock on a mountaintop with the afternoon sun on them, and his voice cracked on the last word, and he said it again. "I love you. I have loved you since the night you sang by your fire, and your voice cracked on the last line, and you kept singing. I have loved you since you sat on the cold rock and said hi to a dragon. I have loved you since you reached across the fire and took my hand like it was the simplest thing in the world. I have spent 300 years being afraid to love anything, and you walked up my mountain, and I love you and I'm terrified, and I don't care." She pulled back to look at his face. His eyes were wet. His mouth was trembling. The most powerful creature she had ever seen, shaking because he'd said 3 words out loud. "I love you too," she said. "I loved you when you left berries at my camp, and I ate them, and they tasted like something from a world I'd been looking for my whole life. I loved you when you made me tea and wrapped my wrist, and I wasn't sure you were real. I loved you when you told me about Ashkari, and your voice stayed steady, and your hands shook, and I wanted to hold them until they stopped." "Saren," he said. "I loved you before I knew what you were. I love you more now, and I am done being careful about it." She kissed him. She put her hands on his chest and pushed him down onto the warm rock, and his hands came up into her hair, and she lay against him, and the sky was huge and blue above them. "The heat," he said against her mouth, "if it's too much." "It's not too much," she said. "Tell me if—" Kale stopped talking. He stopped talking. His hands moved over her slowly, learning, not rushing. She felt each finger trembling slightly against her skin. 700 years of nothing, and now this. She pulled his shirt over his head and put her mouth on his chest, and felt the vibration that lived inside him resonating against her lips. He inhaled sharply, and his hands pressed into her hips hard enough that she'd find the marks later and be glad of them. 300 years, she whispered against his skin. "Don't remind me," he said. 300 years and you're shaking. You have that effect." She laughed against his chest. He laughed too, and the laughter turned into kissing, and then into something slower and more deliberate. His hands clumsy with her buttons in a way that made her love him more. Their foreheads bumping at one point, both of them laughing again, and the laughter made it real in a way that perfection wouldn't have. When they came together, she felt the heat of him, and she made a sound she didn't recognize, and he went still above her, checking. "I'm okay," she said. "Don't stop." He didn't stop. He moved with her, his forehead against hers, his breath on her face, and she wrapped her legs around him and pulled him closer, and he said her name, just her name, and something broke open in her chest. Afterward they lay tangled on the ridge. His body curled around hers, his arm heavy across her waist. She pressed back against him and felt his breath slow. "Is it always like that?" she said, "with a dragon?" "I don't know," he said. "I've never done this before." She turned in his arms to look at him. Never. 700 years, and no, never. She touched his face. His eyes were soft and completely unguarded. She was looking at a man with no walls left. I'm honored, she said, and she meant it simply with her whole heart. You're everything, he said. They slept on the ridge, wrapped around each other, and the mountain kept them warm through the night. Chapter 9. He took her to the dragon world on a clear morning, when the sky was so blue it hurt to look at. He shifted on the ridge. She climbed onto his back, her hands gripping the base of his neck where the scales were smaller and smoother. The heat of him was immense through her clothes and the palms of her hands. He flew. She had never imagined what flying would feel like. The ground fell away and the air caught them, and the valley shrank to a green bowl, and the mountains stretched out in every direction, and she pressed her face against his neck and laughed. She laughed and the wind took the sound, and she felt his body vibrate with something she realized was laughter too. A deep, rumbling joy that shook through his scales and into her bones. They rose above the peaks. The air was thin and cold, and he was warm beneath her, and the world was enormous, and she understood, for the first time, what it meant to be free. At the highest peak, where the air crackled with energy, he turned. She felt the shift. The world rippled, colors changed, the light changed, and they were somewhere else. The dragon world. The mountains glowed. They pulsed with a deep, internal light, amber and gold and copper, as if they were made of compressed fire. The sky was the color of molten metal at dawn. Rivers of liquid gold wound through valleys of crystal forests where the trees caught the light and threw it in rainbows, and the leaves rang with a clear, bell-like sound when the wind moved through them. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. He landed on a high plateau overlooking a valley that stretched to the horizon. She slid from his back and stood there, turning slowly. The air tasted of honey and metal. The ground was warm and hummed beneath her feet. He shifted back. He stood beside her, looking at the world he'd left behind. This is where we lived, he said. This valley, there were hundreds of us, families, communities. We raised our young in those forests. We swam in those rivers. She looked at the crystal trees, swaying in a wind she could barely feel, their leaves ringing, and the sound made her chest ache. It's still here, she said, all of it. Everything except us, he said. She took his hand. They walked through the crystal forest together, the light fracturing into colors she had no words for. He showed her the places, the clearing where the elders gathered, the river bend where the young dragons learned to fly, a cave where the walls were carved with names, hundreds of names, in the old dragon script. He stopped in front of the cave wall. She watched his face as he read the names. Ashkari, he said, touching one. Salhrin, Castle, Thurin, Mora, Vesk. His finger moved across the stone, name after name. His hand was steady, but his voice got quieter with each one, as if each name cost him something to say out loud. You carved all of these, Saren said. After the massacre, he said, I came here and carved every name I could remember. It took me months. I couldn't let them just be gone. She stood in the crystal forest, in a world of gold rivers and singing trees, looking at a wall of names carved by a creature who had outlived everyone he ever knew. Put my name here, she said, someday when the time comes. He looked at her. I want to be on this wall, she said, with them, with your people. His eyes filled. He took her face in his hands very gently. You are my people, he said. She kissed him. In the crystal forest, in the world between worlds, with the singing trees ringing around them and the gold light pouring down. She kissed him, and he kissed her back with the full force of a love that he had spent his whole life being afraid of and had finally let in. They held each other in the dragon world, and the beauty of it was almost too much to bear. Chapter 10. They had 47 years. She stayed on the mountain. She sent her survey to the guild with a letter of resignation and a note that said the terrain was unmappable, which was true, and that she'd found what she was looking for, which was also true. Marin cried when she told her. Doran gave her a case of wine. Hagen said he'd known from the beginning. You knew I was going to stay on a mountain with a 700-year-old dragon, Saren said. I knew you were going to stay wherever felt like home, Hagen said. That mountain's been waiting for someone like you. What does someone like me look like? Stubborn enough to climb it and smart enough to love what's up there. She punched him lightly on the shoulder. He grinned. He was the first real friend she'd had in years, and she hadn't even realized she'd been missing that. The first year was the strangest and the best. She expanded the cabin. She and Kale worked side by side through the long, warm days, hauling stone from the river, cutting timber from the lower forest. He'd built the original cabin 300 years ago, alone, in the months after the massacre, when the work was the only thing keeping him from flying to the highest peak and never coming back. That wall is crooked, she said, standing back with her arms folded. It's character, he said. It's crooked. The original wall is crooked too. I was grieving. You're not grieving now. Straighten it. He straightened it. She built a second room. A bedroom with a real bed, wide enough for two, with a window that looked out over the valley. She made the frame from mountain oak, and he carved the headboard with patterns from the old dragon script, because she asked him to, and because he couldn't say no to her about anything, which she figured out quickly and used to her advantage. You're manipulating a 700-year-old dragon, he said, watching her rearrange the furniture for the third time. You could stop me, she said. I could. But you won't. No, I won't. She planted a garden. His garden was extraordinary, full of plants that had no business growing at this altitude. Her garden was next to it, growing the ordinary things he'd never bothered with: tomatoes, beans, squash. She tended it every morning on her knees in the dirt while he sat on the cabin step and drank his tea and watched her. Your tomatoes are dying, he said after the first week. They're adjusting, she said. They're dying. They're adjusting slowly. The tomatoes died. She replanted them. They died again. She replanted them again. By the third attempt, something about the mountain's soil or her stubbornness got through to them, and they grew. The first time she picked a ripe tomato and bit into it on the spot, juice running down her chin, she looked at him and said, "Don't say anything." I wasn't going to say anything, he said. Your face is saying it. My face is 700 years old. It says a lot of things I don't mean. She threw a tomato at him. He caught it. He ate it. These are good, he said. I know they're good. Very good. Stop talking about my tomatoes, she said. I love your tomatoes. I love you. It came out easy, like breathing. They'd said it before on the ridge that afternoon when everything broke open. But this was different. This was standing in a garden with dirt on her knees and tomato juice on her chin, saying it in the middle of an ordinary day. And his face when he heard it, the amusement softening into something deeper, something in the bones of him, that was the moment she understood what their life was going to be. She made the cabin a home. For 300 years it had been a shelter. She was turning it into a place to live. She made curtains from cloth she bought in the village. She wove rugs for the stone floor. She filled the shelves with her own things, her journals and maps and 17 versions of the morning song, next to his centuries of collected objects. At first the shelves looked strange, his ancient things alongside her new ones. After a while, the strangeness faded. She hung a wind chime in the doorway. Crystal, from the dragon world. He'd brought her a piece of the singing trees, and she'd cut it and strung it and hung it where the breeze could reach it. It rang one clear note that carried across the valley. That sound, he said, the first morning he heard it. He was standing in the doorway, his face still. What about it? She asked. It sounds like the forests, like home. Good, she said, that's the point. He pulled her toward him and kissed her forehead, gently, the way he did when words weren't enough. Their bodies learned each other in those early months. For her, it was learning to live with his heat. The way the bed stayed warm all night even when the fire burned low. The way his skin flushed hotter when he was feeling something strongly, so she always knew when he was moved or angry or wanting her. For him, it was learning to be touched at all. She saw it in the first weeks, the slight startling when she reached for him, the half-second before his body relaxed into her hands. 700 years of skin that nobody touched. She was patient with it. She'd brush her fingers across the back of his neck while she walked past. She'd lean against him while he was reading. She'd take his hand while they walked. Small touches, steady, until his body stopped treating contact as a surprise and started treating it as ordinary. One evening, she came up behind him while he was carving and wrapped her arms around his chest and rested her chin on his shoulder. His hands went still on the wood. "What are you doing?" he said. "Holding you," she said. "I'm working." "I know, keep working." "I can't work when you're doing that." "Doing what? I'm just standing here." "You're breathing on my neck." "I'll stop breathing then." He put down the carving. He turned in the chair and pulled her into his lap and kissed her, and she could feel his smile against her mouth. She ran her hands up his chest, and he made that sound, low and rumbling, the one she felt in her ribs, and his hands slid under her shirt, and she gasped. They didn't make it to the bed that evening. The chair was close enough. Afterward, she sat in his lap with her forehead against his, her whole body flushed and warm, and he held her with his face in the curve of her neck. "We broke the chair," she said. "We did," he said. "You're going to have to make a new one." "Worth it." She laughed, he laughed. They stayed where they were on the floor of the cabin, tangled up in each other, and outside the valley was settling into evening. The days had a rhythm. She worked in the mornings. She mapped the valley and the mountain in detail that would never go to the guild, filling journal after journal. She was documenting a world that existed nowhere else. "You're writing a book," Cale said one afternoon, looking over her shoulder at the pile of journals. "I'm taking notes," she said. "You have 37 notebooks." "Detailed notes." "That's a book." "It's a very long set of notes." He smiled. It had taken weeks to earn the first one, and now she saw it every day, and it still caught her breath. He carved in the afternoons. He sat at the table by the window where the light was best and worked pieces of mountain wood into shapes so precise they looked alive. Hawks and foxes and deer, the valley in miniature. Figures of people he'd known, faces from centuries past, kept alive in wood. She'd sit across from him and watch his hands. Large, steady, impossibly careful, the hands of someone who understood what it meant to hold something fragile. "You could sell these," she said once. "Why would I sell them?" he said. "Because they're beautiful." "I don't need the money. I need them on my shelf where I can see them." She leaned across the table and kissed his cheek while he was carving, and he tilted his head toward her, and she felt his smile against her lips. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked. They never ran out of things to say. 700 years of life meant 700 years of stories, and he told them to her one by one, each evening a new piece of a world she'd never imagined. He told her about the dragon councils, where the elders gathered in the crystal caves and debated and argued and occasionally set things on fire when arguments got heated. Solhrin once melted a stalagmite during a vote on fishing rights, he said. It took the cave 200 years to grow back. He told her about learning to take human form. It's like learning a language, he said. At first everything feels wrong. You're too small. Everything is cold. And then slowly you adjust, and one day you realize you've been in human form for a month and you forgot to miss the other one. He told her about the languages he'd learned as they changed around him. How he'd sit on the ridge and listen to the village below, year after year, hearing the words shift and reshape themselves. The version Hagen sings is closest to the original, he said. Lurath would be pleased. The woman who wrote it, Saren said. The schoolteacher, yes, she spent a year on it. She wanted every word to carry weight. It does. I know, he said. I hear it every time you sing. She sang for him often. At the fire in the garden while she was cooking, the morning song and others, and new ones she made up. She didn't have a remarkable voice, but he listened to her with his whole body, as if the sound were something he was taking in through his skin. She told him her parts too, her father dying while she was on a contract 200 miles away, the guilt of not going back. Tessa. She found me years later in Varanth, Saren said. She'd married, settled there. She saw me in the market and came over smiling, said it had been too long, like nothing had happened. What did you do? Cale asked. I smiled back, said it was good to see her, walked away and never spoke to her again. She poked the fire. That's the thing about losing people. The first time it hurts. After a while, you get efficient at it. He was quiet. I don't want to be efficient with you, she said. That's what scares me. You don't have to be, he said. I know, that's what scares me. He reached across and took her hand, the way he did in small moments, just to confirm she was there. They were aware of time in a way Saren had never been before, because time meant something different when you loved someone it didn't touch. She found her first gray hair at 37. She looked at it in the small mirror by the wash basin for a long moment. She pulled it out and didn't mention it. At 40, there were more. She stopped pulling them. She caught Cale looking at her one morning, his blue-green eyes moving over the silver threads at her temples, his expression tender in a way that made her throat tight. Don't, he said when she started to turn away. Don't what? She said. Don't turn away when I look at you. You were looking at my gray hair. I was looking at you, he said. That night, lying with her back against the steady heat of his body, she thought about the decades ahead and the decades he'd already lived. She pressed back against him and felt his arm tighten around her, and she let it be enough. At 45, her joints stiffened on cold mornings. At 50, the trail down to the village took longer than it used to. She joked about it. Cale didn't laugh. By 60, she was slower on the trails. She rested more, carried less. The walk to the village that used to take 2 hours took 3, and then 4. Cale would take her pack without being asked, and she'd let him, and neither of them mentioned it. He looked the same. He would always look the same. You're staring, she'd say. I'm memorizing, he'd say. They fought sometimes. He was ancient and set in his ways. She was stubborn and impatient. They had different ideas about everything from how to store firewood to whether it was appropriate to reorganize someone's 300-year-old bookshelf without asking. You moved Ashkari's book, he said one morning, standing in front of the shelves with his arms folded. I organized by subject, she said, medical texts together, history together. I had them organized by date. That's a terrible system. It's a chronological system. It's a system designed by someone who lived alone for 300 years and never had to find anything quickly. I always found things quickly, he said. Because you memorized where everything was, that's not organization, that's obsession. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the shelves, looked at her. Your system is better, he said. I know, she said. I hate that your system is better. I know that too. She kissed his cheek on her way past. He caught her wrist and pulled her back and kissed her properly, and the argument was over. They had good years, year after year of good, waking up beside him and feeling his heartbeat and knowing this was hers, this life, this man, this mountain. cooking together and eating together and sitting in silence while the wind chimes sang and the valley held them. She was happy, the kind of happy that doesn't announce itself, that just settles in and stays. Hagen died when Saren was 52. Quietly, in his sleep, in the same chair at the saddleback where he'd sat every evening for 50 years. Doran found him in the morning with an empty glass and a peaceful expression. Saren sat in the inn that afternoon and drank his beer and sang his grandmother's song, all 17 verses, to a room full of people who hadn't known him as well as they should have. When she walked back up the mountain, Cale met her at the tree line and held her while she cried. "He was a good man," she said. "He was," Cale said. "He asked about you every time I came down, every single time." "I know," I could hear him. She laughed through the tears. "Of course you could." Maren died the following winter. Doran sold the inn and moved to Varanth. The village changed around them, slowly, the way villages do. The mountain stayed. On an autumn evening when the valley was gold and the last of the light was holding on to the ridgeline, she said, "What happens when I get old?" They were sitting on the ridge, watching the sunset. Her head was on his shoulder. His arm was around her. They'd been sitting like this for years, in this exact spot. He was quiet for a moment. "I'll love you," he said. "That's not what I'm getting at," she said. "I know what you're getting at." "Then answer it." I did answer it. "You'll get old. I'll love you. Your hair will go gray. I'll love you. Your knees will ache and you'll fall asleep by the fire at 7 in the evening. I'll love you." Cale, "I'll love you when you're 40 and 50 and 60 and 70. I'll love you when you can't climb the ridge anymore and I carry you up here. I'll love you when you forget where you put your journal and blame me for moving it." She was quiet. The sun was going down. The valley turned from gold to copper. "But I won't be here forever," she said. "No," he said. "And you will." "Yes." She pulled back to look at his face. The light was on it. He looked the same as the day she'd met him. He would look the same 100 years from now, 1,000 years. "What will you do," she said, "after?" He looked at her, his blue-green eyes holding hers. "I'll keep the fire going," he said. "I'll keep your garden. I'll sit on this ridge and watch the sunset and remember every evening we spent here. And I'll wait." "Wait for what?" she said. "For you." "Cale, I'll be." "I know, and I don't care." His voice was steady. "I have more time than I know what to do with, and the oldest songs, the ones older than the morning song, older than anything Hagen's grandmother knew, they say the soul walks forward, that it wears new faces, forgets, and finds again." He paused. "I believe them. I've believed them for 300 years before I knew why. Now I know why." "You can't know that," she said. "No, but I'm not waiting for a possibility. I'm waiting for you. There's a difference." His voice was sure in a way she felt in her chest. "You found this mountain once. Something in you knew to come here. That doesn't stop because you stop." She kissed him. She put her hands on his face and kissed him with the full weight of a love that knew it was mortal, that loved anyway, loved harder because of it. "I'll find you," she said. "I promise I'll come back." "I know," he said. "Every lifetime, I'll come back every time." "I know." "And you'll know me," she said. "I'll know you the way I know the sun. Even when it goes down, I know it's coming back." She leaned her head against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. The last of the light faded. The stars came out thick and bright, and the valley hummed, and the crystal chime in the cabin doorway sang one clear note behind them. "I want the best memories with you," he said. "Every day we have left, I want to fill this mountain with so many memories of you that the stone itself remembers." "That's a lot of stone," she said. "You deserve a lot of stone." She laughed. He held her tighter. The stars turned overhead. "Stay with me," she said. Always, he said. They sat on the ridge as the night came on. The mountain held them. The valley held the mountain. And for a while, for a long, sweet, uncountable while, that was enough. Chapter 11. In the villages below the Ashenmaw, the old women still sang the morning song on winter nights. Children learned the words before they could read. The melody passed from mother to daughter, grandmother to grandchild. Most of them sang the short version, the one that told of the dragons and the massacre and the grief. But in Dunhallow, they sang the long version, the one with the verse about the sovereign. And the one they called the sovereign, old as the stone, loved a woman of the valley and called this land his home. The new innkeeper, who had bought the saddleback from Doran's daughter and renamed it the Ridgeback, said the verse had been different when he was a boy. The old version had talked about a prophecy, a woman who would come one day. Now the verse spoke of it as something that had already happened, as though the song itself had changed when the story caught up to it. Nobody could say exactly when the new words appeared, but the older villagers remembered a woman who had come to Dunhallow decades ago, a surveyor, who had gone up the Ashenmaw and never returned. And they remembered how, years later, the song had a new ending that nobody remembered adding. And she came with her maps and her songs and her spine, and she climbed the old mountain, and she crossed the old line. And the sovereign who'd waded through centuries of rain learned the language of love in a new voice again. She asked for nothing but to stay, and he let her. The scholars in Varanth called it folk evolution. Songs change over time, they said. Verses get added, details shift. It's perfectly natural. The people of Dunhallow knew better. They knew the mountain was warm because something lived on it. They knew time moved wrong up there. They knew a woman had climbed up and found something worth staying for. They just didn't talk about it with outsiders. Some things belong to the people who live in their shadow. The mountain stayed warm, the valley stayed green, the fire in the cabin stayed lit. He put her name on the wall, in the crystal forest, in the dragon world, beside the names of everyone he had ever loved and lost. SEREN, in the old script. He kept her garden. The tomatoes never grew right, but the herbs were good. He kept her journals on the shelf beside his. He kept the wind chime in the doorway. He carved her, every age, every expression. Young, striding up the mountain with her jaw set. Middle-aged, laughing with her head thrown back, dirt on her knees from the garden. Gray-haired, sitting in the doorway with the sun on her face, smiling. He lined them up on the shelf and looked at them every morning and every evening. Some days he'd pick up the carving of her young face and hold it and say her name out loud just to hear it in the cabin. He kept the fire going, he'd promised. And he waited, not with dread, not with the hollow patience of someone killing time. He waited the way you wait for something you are certain of, with the quiet readiness of a person who knows what's coming and is simply keeping things ready for when it arrives. Years passed, decades, the village changed. The road from Varanth was paved with stone. The church was rebuilt. The children who had learned the morning song grew up and taught it to their own children. The mountain stayed warm. The mountain always stayed warm. On a Tuesday afternoon, 32 years after Seren died, a woman walked into Dunhallow. She was young, late 20s. She had dark hair cut short and paint under her fingernails and a bag over one shoulder that clinked with jars and brushes. She was an artist. She'd been traveling the mountain region for 3 months, painting landscapes, selling small watercolors at village markets to pay for the next stretch of road. She'd been wandering for years. She couldn't have said what she was looking for. Every place she painted was beautiful. Every place she left behind felt wrong, as if the thing she needed was always just over the next ridge, around the next bend. She walked into the ridgeback, and the innkeeper set a bowl of soup in front of her. Passing through, he asked. "Depends," she said. "I'm looking for something to paint, anywhere scenic around here." "You could try the mountain, if you don't mind the stories." She looked out the window. The mountain rose behind the village, its peak wrapped in cloud, its lower slopes impossibly green against the brown autumn landscape. She put her spoon down. "What stories?" she said, but she wasn't really listening. She was looking at the mountain. She couldn't stop looking at it. "Old folk tales," the innkeeper said. "Time moves wrong up there. People go up and don't come back." He wiped the bar. "There was a woman, years ago, went up to survey the place. Never came back. The old folks say she fell in love with the mountain, or something on it." "Has anyone gone up recently?" she asked. "God, no. The older ones say it's dangerous. The younger ones just say there's no point." She looked at the mountain. The late afternoon light was hitting the slopes, and the green was so vivid it looked painted. Something in her chest was pulling. A deep, wordless ache, like homesickness for a place she'd never been. She'd felt this before, all her life. A pull toward mountains, toward high places, toward green valleys and warm stone. She'd tried to paint it once, sat with a blank canvas, and what came out was a mountain she'd never seen, green when it should have been brown, warm when it should have been cold, with a cabin on its slope where smoke rose from a chimney, and a figure stood in the doorway. She'd thrown the painting away. It had frightened her, how real it felt. "I want to go up," she said. "Miss, I really don't think," the innkeeper started. "Is there a trail?" He told her. She finished her soup. She went up to her room and packed a day bag and lay on the bed and couldn't sleep because the mountain was filling the window, and the pull in her chest was so strong it felt like someone calling her name in a voice she almost recognized. She left before dawn. The trail climbed through old pines, frost on the ground, cold air thin and sharp. The cold stopped. One step she was in autumn, the next she was somewhere else. The air went warm and soft. The trees turned green. Wildflowers grew along the trail in colors that belonged to a different season. She stood there, tears were running down her face, and she didn't know why. She wasn't sad. She wasn't afraid. She felt like she'd walked into a room she'd been dreaming about her whole life. She wiped her face. She kept climbing. She climbed for hours, past standing stones carved with symbols that made something tighten in her when she looked at them. She stopped at one and touched it, and it was warm under her fingers, and she traced the carvings, and something flickered at the edge of her mind, like a word she couldn't quite remember. She sat down beside the stone and opened her sketchbook and drew. The valley below her. The green, the river, the light. Her hand moved across the page, and when she looked at what she'd made, it was the best thing she'd ever drawn. It looked like home. On the ridge above her, a man stood watching. He'd been watching since she walked into the village. He'd heard her voice in the inn, asking about the mountain, and the carving he'd been working on had fallen from his fingers. He'd watched her leave before dawn. He'd watched her climb. He'd watched her stop where the cold turned warm. He'd watched her cry. He'd watched her sit beside the marker stone and trace the carvings with her fingers. His name, in the old script. The same way Saren had done it, 32 years ago and a lifetime before that and every lifetime before that, always finding the stone, always tracing the same symbols without knowing what they said. He knew what they said. He'd carved them. His name, over and over, 14 stones along the ridge, so that whatever shape she came back in, whatever she remembered or didn't, her hands would find him first. He closed his eyes. He opened them. The sun was on the mountain. The valley was green. The wind moved through the crystal chime in the cabin doorway, and it rang one clear note. She looked up. She saw him, a man on the ridge above her. Black hair, broad shoulders. And when he looked at her, even from this distance, she could see his eyes, blue, shot through with green, pale and vivid, and the sight of them hit her somewhere in the chest before she'd finished the thought. She stood up. Her sketchbook fell closed on the ground beside her. She didn't pick it up. He started down the slope toward her. He moved with ease, like someone who'd walked this ground a long time. His eyes didn't leave hers. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see his face clearly. He was looking at her the way you look at something you've been waiting for. His jaw was tight. His hands were still. Those blue-green eyes moved over her face slowly, reading something there. "You're crying," he said. His voice was low, and it went through her like warm water. She touched her face. Her cheeks were wet again. She hadn't noticed. "I don't know why," she said. "I do," he said. They stood on the mountainside with the green valley below them and the warm air around them and the carved stone between them. She looked at this stranger and felt the world rearrange itself around a new center, and she didn't understand it, but she didn't question it either. "I'm Lyra," she said. "I'm Kale," he said. She said his name, and something rang in her chest, deep and clear, like a bell she'd been waiting her whole life to hear. "I feel like I know you," she said. "I'm sorry, that's a strange thing to say to someone." "It's not strange," he said. His voice was rough, his eyes were bright. "It's not strange at all." The wind moved through the valley. From somewhere up the slope, a crystal chime caught the breeze and sang one clear note that carried across the mountain. She heard it, she turned toward the sound, and she smiled. "What is that?" she asked. He looked at her smile. And 32 years of keeping the fire lit and the garden alive and the wind chimes singing in the doorway landed on him all at once, and his eyes filled, and he smiled back. "Home," he said. "Come, I'll show you." She picked up her sketchbook. She followed him up the slope. The trail was warm under her feet. Ahead of her, through the trees, a thin line of smoke rose from a chimney into the blue sky. She followed him home.